A smart woman is not simply one who knows more. She is one who feels less threatened by what she does not yet know. Her wisdom is not in her words, but in her willingness to be quiet, especially with herself. In a world that often rewards noise and speed, the truly intelligent woman slows down. She observes before she decides. She pauses before she speaks. And in that sacred pause, she becomes something powerful, undisturbed. If you're new here, welcome to Self-Mastery, where we share timeless wisdom to help you protect your energy, elevate your mindset, and walk in purpose. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a message that speaks to your soul, strengthens your spirit, that could shift your entire path. A truly intelligent woman does not measure her wisdom by the sharpness of her tongue, but by the stillness of her heart. She understands that real strength is not displayed in how loudly she speaks or how quickly she reacts, but in how silently she observes and how consciously she responds. In the space between impulse and reaction, between the sting of a word and the decision to speak, she carves out the power to choose. This choice is what elevates her. It is not perfection she strives for, it is presence. And presence begins with emotional stillness. There's a quiet strength in emotional stillness that often goes unnoticed in a world addicted to noise and urgency. But the woman who trains herself to remain still in the face of emotional storms gains access to a clarity most never touch. She doesn't allow herself to be pulled into every wave of drama, nor does she react to every provocation. This is not repression. It is self-regulation. The difference is vital. Consider a moment when someone deeply frustrated or emotionally charged speaks with aggression. Perhaps it's a partner, a friend, or a family member. The natural instinct is to match that intensity. But that is not intelligence, it is reactivity. Emotional stillness is the gap that allows you to breathe instead of break, to witness instead of wound. The woman who has mastered this does not deny her emotions. She simply chooses not to let them make her decisions. Neuroscience has shown us that when the amygdala, our brain's emotional alarm system, is triggered, it often hijacks the rational prefrontal cortex. But with mindfulness and emotional discipline, this biological reaction can be softened. Breathing deeply for even 6 seconds can restore access to the rational mind. What appears as a simple pause is, in reality, a profound act of emotional sovereignty. A woman in command of her stillness doesn't enter unnecessary battles. She chooses her responses with awareness. She knows that every reaction costs her energy, and she has stopped giving her energy away for free. Her peace is no longer up for negotiation. This is not passivity, it is precision. There's a story of a woman named Alina, a school counselor, who often found herself overwhelmed by the chaos around her. Between emotionally turbulent students, exhausted co-workers, and the mounting pressures of her own life, she realized that she had become someone who reacted to everything. One day, a parent burst into her office, accusing her of not doing enough for their child. The old Alina would have interrupted, defended, and emotionally collapsed afterward. But something in her had changed. She let the parent speak. She breathed. She listened fully. When the parent finally paused, expecting resistance, Alina responded with measured calm. "I can feel how much you care about your child. Let's work together to help them. Tell me more about what you've noticed." There was no tension in her voice, no defensiveness, just stillness. And that stillness changed the entire atmosphere. The parent softened. A productive conversation followed. That day, Alina realized the real strength wasn't in overpowering others, but in not letting others overpower her emotions. This is the unseen power of the woman who learns to stand still inside herself. In relationships, this stillness becomes sacred. When a partner lashes out in pain, when emotions run high, when misunderstandings arise, the emotionally intelligent woman does not always meet emotion with more emotion. She becomes the mirror instead of the flame. She doesn't suppress herself, but she elevates her reactions. She delays gratification in favor of alignment. And in doing so, she holds space for healing instead of contributing to harm. Stillness is a boundary too. It is the refusal to participate in cycles of emotional immaturity. It says, I will not let your chaos become my character. And over time, this stillness becomes magnetic. People are drawn to her without fully understanding why. It's the peace in her eyes, the softness in her words, the clarity in her presence. She is not drained by every conflict because she doesn't carry every battle into her soul. Stillness also allows a woman to hear what others miss. The emotion behind the words, the needs behind the anger, the fear behind the silence. When you're not caught in your own internal noise, you can actually listen. And when you truly listen, you don't just connect with others, you awaken them. There is a quote that says, in the midst of movement and chaos, keep stillness inside of you. This is not just poetic, it is practical. In a home filled with tension, a still woman becomes the equilibrium. In a relationship filled with misunderstanding, she becomes the translator. In a life filled with uncertainty, she becomes the anchor. But emotional stillness doesn't happen by accident. It's built through daily choices. When you wake up, do you rush into your day? Or do you take 5 minutes to sit with yourself? When someone criticizes you, do you react with defense? Or do you breathe and consider what truth, if any, lies beneath their words? These micro decisions shape emotional mastery. They may seem small, but over time, they become who you are. And this emotional stillness naturally connects to something more subtle, yet even more powerful, your energy. Because a still heart generates a different frequency, and that frequency communicates more than any words ever can. We often underestimate how much our energy introduces us before we speak. But energy is not just a spiritual concept. It is deeply rooted in biology. The electromagnetic field of the heart is measurable, and it is significantly more powerful than the brain's. It radiates into the space around us, affecting not only how others feel in our presence, but how they respond to us. A smart woman knows this. She becomes highly intentional about the kind of energy she brings into every room, every conversation, every relationship. You've likely experienced this before. Someone walks in, and without saying a word, the atmosphere shifts. You either feel comforted or disturbed, inspired or drained. That's energy. And the smart woman doesn't just focus on how she looks, she focuses on how she feels. Because how she feels radiates outward and becomes part of the environment she creates. There's an old story of a woman named Elsie, a nurse who worked in a trauma unit. Despite the intensity of her environment, everyone felt calm in her presence. Even the most frantic patients settled down when she entered the room. When asked how she maintained her peace, she smiled and said, I prepare my energy before I enter. I breathe, I center myself. I remind myself, I am not here to react. I am here to serve. Her energy was not just something she gave, it was something she's designed. This is the difference between living reactively and living intentionally. When a woman learns to become responsible for her energy, she stops blaming others for how she feels. She becomes the thermostat, not the thermometer. She sets the tone instead of being controlled by it. And this is perhaps the most attractive trait she can cultivate, not just in romantic relationships, but in every human connection. A woman with strong energy doesn't chase love. She attracts it. Not because of manipulation or performance, but because she feels whole without needing to be filled. She can be alone without feeling lonely. She can be surrounded by chaos and still radiate calm. She becomes rare, and rarity is magnetic. This does not mean she's always happy or perfectly centered. It means she takes ownership of her internal state. When she feels drained, she doesn't blame the world. She checks where she leaked her energy. Was it a conversation she stayed too long in? Was it a thought pattern she fed with worry? Was it a boundary she abandoned for comfort? These questions bring her back to power. The woman who tends to her energy the way others tend to their appearance understands something essential. It is not your words that make people trust you. It is your vibration. Not every relationship is lost due to betrayal or lies. Many are lost because the energy no longer felt safe, nourishing, or inspired. A smart woman is aware of this. She doesn't rely solely on logic to connect with others. She listens to the F feeling, the tone of presence. When two people meet, their nervous systems begin to communicate before they exchange words. If one person is anxious, chaotic, or unresolved, and the other is grounded, the interaction is immediately impacted. This is why people say, "I don't know what it is about her, but I feel calm when I'm around her." That calm is cultivated. It's not accidental. But cultivating energy isn't about faking positivity or pretending to be okay. It's about alignment. It's about consistently choosing thoughts, habits, environments, and relationships that elevate your internal state instead of drain it. And when this becomes your lifestyle, your energy becomes a sanctuary. People seek your presence not because you have all the answers, but because they feel more like themselves around you. There's something profoundly spiritual about a woman who has mastered her energy. She does not explain herself often because her presence explains everything. She is not easily offended because her peace cannot be stolen. She is not loud, but she is deeply felt. Her presence is a healing. And wherever she goes, she does not just enter a space, she shifts it. To be a smart woman, then, is not about how much you say, how much you know, or how much you give. It is about how deeply you have learned to be with yourself. Emotional stillness and energetic intention are not external achievements. They are internal commitments. They are the daily disciplines that shape not only how you relate to others, but how you carry your own soul. And when these two forces, stillness and energy, align, a woman becomes unforgettable. A woman who has grown wise through experience does not make her heart so available that others feel entitled to it. She has learned, sometimes through deep pain, that love without boundaries is not love, it is self-abandonment. Her affection is no longer scattered like seeds in the wind, hoping someone will take care of them. Instead, she plants it with intention, and only in places where she knows it will be watered with respect. The smart woman knows that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are gates to protect the sacred within. Many women are taught to be kind, to be giving, to be nurturing. But few are taught that giving too much of yourself to the wrong people can fracture your spirit. The woman who doesn't set boundaries eventually begins to resent her own kindness. She begins to shrink in relationships where she should be standing tall. She becomes exhausted, not because she's weak, but because she's pouring herself into broken cups. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. They are the declaration. This is where I end and you begin. In relationships, they are essential, not only to protect your peace, but to deepen the connection. Without boundaries, love becomes a performance, a pleasing, a silent negotiation where one person's needs are consistently sacrificed for the comfort of the other. But when a woman begins to love herself enough to say, "No more," she reclaims her dignity. There's a story of a woman named Miriam. For years, she stayed in a relationship with a man who never truly saw her. He loved her when it was convenient, appreciated her when she was useful, and dismissed her when she expressed her needs. Miriam thought that if she just gave a little more, he would finally change. So she did. She gave her time, her energy, her silence, and eventually her self-worth. It wasn't until she sat in a quiet room, feeling like a stranger to herself, that she realized the truth. I have trained him to disrespect me. She hadn't used her voice. She hadn't set limits. In trying to preserve the relationship, she had let go of herself. One morning, Miriam didn't scream or accuse. She didn't demand or plead. She simply said, "This version of me no longer exists." And she walked away, not because she hated him, but because she had finally remembered how to love herself. That is the quiet power of boundaries. They don't always need to be loud. They are not weapons. They are mirrors, showing others how you expect to be treated by how you treat yourself. In healthy relationships, boundaries are a gift. They teach both people where safety lives. They make expectations clear. They create space for individual growth, which makes collective growth possible. Without boundaries, there is confusion, miscommunication, and resentment. But with them, there is respect, trust, and emotional safety. The woman who understands this no longer tolerates the chaos of connection that costs her inner peace. Psychology confirms what the heart already knows. Lack of boundaries leads to increased anxiety, low self-esteem, and even physical fatigue. When you say yes when you mean no, your nervous system carries the tension. Your body knows when your spirit is being dishonored. That's why fatigue often isn't about doing too much. It's about doing too much of what is not aligned with your soul. A smart woman pays attention to this. She no longer says yes to every invitation, every request, every cry for help. She knows that no is a complete sentence. She doesn't need to explain her priorities or justify her choices to those who only love her when she's convenient. Her time is sacred, her energy is currency, and her peace is priceless. Some may call her cold, but she is not cold, she is clear. She's not heartless, she's healed. There's a quiet grace in a woman who no longer needs to be liked to be whole. She has stopped betraying herself just to avoid disappointing others. She has chosen truth over comfort. And in that truth, she has found herself again. Boundaries also change the dynamic of romantic relationships. A woman who knows her worth doesn't chase attention. She observes consistency. She doesn't beg for respect. She expects it. And she doesn't stay where she must constantly remind someone how to treat her. She knows that the right partner will never require her to abandon herself to be loved. When you have clear boundaries, you filter out those who were only drawn to your availability, not your value. You begin to see who was there because they respected you and who was there because they could use you. And sometimes it's painful because you realize that some relationships only existed because you had no boundaries. But once you begin to live with intention, only those who align with your integrity remain. Boundaries are not just about saying no to others. They are also about saying yes to yourself, saying yes to rest, saying yes to silence, saying yes to being misunderstood if it means being authentic. This is the real work of emotional maturity. It's not about hardening yourself. It's about honoring yourself. And as you begin to walk in that clarity, you will notice another shift. You speak less. You argue less. You explain less. Because the smartest women have learned that silence is one of the most powerful tools of wisdom. There is a profound difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from strength. The first is repression. The second is refinement. A woman who has learned the value of her peace no longer feels the need to win every argument, prove every point, or correct every misunderstanding. She knows that the loudest voice in the room is often the one least connected to truth. And so, she chooses silence, not as submission, but as strategy. There's a quote that says, "Don't waste words on people who deserve your silence." Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. The woman who embodies this truth doesn't withhold to manipulate. She withholds to conserve. Her silence is not punishment. It is preservation. Imagine a situation where a woman named Zora is in a relationship with a man who often raises his voice during disagreements. In the past, she would mirror his intensity, raising her voice in return, defending herself at every turn. But now, she has changed. One evening, during yet another heated exchange, she simply says, "I will not argue in this energy." And she leaves the room, not to run away, but to protect what she's built within. Zara's silence does not mean indifference. It means discernment. She knows that arguing with someone committed to misunderstanding her is a misuse of her breath. She saves her words for those who are ready to receive them. This is wisdom. And wisdom speaks less, but says more. When a woman chooses silence at the right moment, she gains something even more powerful than control. She gains insight. In that pause, she sees clearly. She watches. She listens, not to reply, but to understand. And often, what she hears beneath the noise is this isn't about me. She no longer takes things personally that are projections of another's unhealed wounds. Her silence becomes her shield. Still, silence is not always easy. It takes strength to walk away from the need to be right. It takes maturity to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix it. But the woman who masters this art becomes untouchable in the best way. She no longer dances with dysfunction. She no longer argues with chaos. She no longer fights to be heard by those who have no intention of listening. Her presence becomes her voice. Her energy speaks volumes, and when she does speak, it matters. Relationships transform in the presence of such a woman. Her partner knows that if she is silent, it is time to listen, not to defend, but to reflect. Her children learn that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of calm. Her friends know that her quiet moments are not distance, but depth. She becomes the emotional anchor in every space she enters, not because she controls others, but because she has mastered herself. This silence also becomes her compass. When a situation feels wrong, she does not argue with it. She observes. She steps back. She lets the truth reveal itself, and it always does. She trusts that clarity comes not always from confrontation, but often from stillness. Because when you stop talking, you start hearing what your spirit has been whispering all along. A woman who has learned to be silent when it's wise, to speak when it's right, and to walk away when its time is not just smart. She is centered. And from the center, she makes decisions that serve her highest self, not her wounded self. She no longer confuses attention with affection. She no longer confuses noise with meaning. She no longer feels the need to convince others of her worth. She lives in quiet confidence, where her soul is her guide and her silence is her strength. And in this space, her life begins to attract relationships that honor her, not drain her. Connections that grow her, not control her. Love that speaks, not shouts. She is a woman of stillness and strength, of silence and wisdom, of boundaries and balance. And everything she touches begins to reflect that. There is a moment, so brief yet so powerful, that exists between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. In that space lies the essence of self-mastery. A woman who learns to honor this moment becomes emotionally sovereign. She no longer gives her power away to every impulse, mood, or provocation. She understands that the way she responds, not what happens to her, defines her experience. Choosing response over reaction is not a technique. It is a way of being that reflects inner clarity and emotional intelligence. Reactions are automatic. They arise when we are unconscious, when old wounds speak louder than present truth, and when the nervous system overrides thoughtful reflection. They are the words we regret, the actions we replay in our mind long after the moment has passed. Reactions often come from fear, pride, insecurity, or pain. They are the echoes of unresolved experiences. But a conscious response that is born from awareness. It is a pause, a breath, a decision made from alignment, not agitation. The brain offers a fascinating insight into this. When we experience a perceived threat, whether it's a harsh word, a broken promise, or a betrayal, the amygdala sends signals that activate the fight, flight, or freeze response. This happens in milliseconds, but what modern neuroscience has shown is that if we can breathe deeply and focus our attention for even 6 seconds, the signal can shift. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and long-term thinking, begins to engage. This is the neurological space where wisdom lives. In those 6 seconds, a woman can choose, will I repeat the past or will I rewrite it? Imagine a woman named Sana. She's sitting across the table from her partner, who has just said something dismissive during a disagreement. Her chest tightens. She feels the urge to raise her voice, to defend, to strike back. But instead of reacting, she takes one slow, intentional breath. She lowers her gaze for a moment, places her hand on her chest, and simply breathes. In that breath, she remembers who she is, not the wounded girl from her past, not the woman desperate to be seen, but the one who has worked to build peace inside herself. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft but steady. I hear you, and I need a few minutes before I respond. She excuses herself, walks into another room, and sits with her breath until her heartbeat returns to calm. This is not avoidance. It is wisdom in motion. Sana doesn't suppress her feelings. She simply refuses to let them rule her. She honors them by giving them space, not by releasing them recklessly. When she returns to the conversation later, her words are guided by clarity, not chaos. The relationship deepens, not because there was no conflict, but because she refused to let conflict become destruction. In romantic relationships, choosing response over reaction is one of the highest forms of love. It means seeing the other not as an enemy, but as a mirror. It means listening not just to words, but to wounds. It means understanding that many arguments are not about what is said, but about what is felt underneath. When both partners begin to respond instead of react, trust deepens, safety grows, conversations transform, but it often begins with one person making the first shift. To cultivate this kind of presence, a woman must learn the practice of self-inquiry. When something triggers her, she asks inwardly, what part of me is feeling threatened? Is this about the present, or is this an echo from the past? What do I want to create with my next words? Connection or separation? These questions don't require immediate answers. They are like candles in a dark room, gently illuminating truth. There's a story of a woman named Layla, who was raised in a household where emotions were explosive and unpredictable. As a result, she learned to react quickly to any perceived threat. In her adult relationships, this pattern followed her. A raised voice from her partner would trigger old panic. A simple disagreement would feel like abandonment. But through intentional work, meditation, journaling, therapy, Layla began to recognize the pattern. One evening, her partner forgot an important date, and instead of immediately lashing out, she paused. She felt the wave of disappointment, but she let it move through her instead of letting it speak for her. Later, she shared her feelings, not with blame, but with vulnerability. And for the first time, her partner didn't feel attacked. He felt seen. That moment began a new chapter for both of them, This is the silent revolution of women who choose response. They stop being at the mercy of others' actions. They stop reacting to life as if it's something happening to them. They become creators, not reactors. They understand that their inner state is the soil from which every relationship grows. And they protect that soil with care. Choosing response also requires a woman to be in tune with her body. The body always whispers before it screams. Tension in the jaw, tightness in the chest, heat rising in the face. These are signals, not enemies. A smart woman doesn't ignore them. She honors them. She steps away, drinks water, breathes deeply, stretches, journals. She returns to her center before she returns to the conflict. And in doing so, she becomes the embodiment of grace. There's a deeper truth here. How we respond to others is often a reflection of how we treat ourselves. If a woman is harsh with herself, she will be harsh with others. If she judges her own emotions, she will judge others. But if she learns to respond to herself with compassion, gentleness, and curiosity, that same energy flows outward. The relationship with self sets the tone for every other connection. A woman who responds with awareness also becomes a sanctuary for others. Her children learn emotional regulation simply by observing her. Her friends feel safe sharing their truth without fear of judgment. Her partner grows emotionally, not because she demands it, but because her presence inspires it. She doesn't lecture others into maturity, she models it. But this path is not without challenge. There will be moments when the urge to react feels overwhelming, when silence feels like weakness, when walking away feels like surrender. But those are the moments where transformation lives. It's easy to be calm when life is calm. It's in the storm that your true foundation is revealed. This journey asks for consistency more than perfection. There will be slip-ups. There will be words said in haste, apologies whispered through tears, lessons learned in hindsight. But every conscious choice rewires the brain. Every pause strengthens the muscle of discipline. Over time, what once felt impossible becomes instinctual. It helps to create rituals that support this practice. A morning routine that centers the mind, evening reflection to observe the day without judgment, intentional solitude to hear your own voice again. When a woman integrates these rituals into her life, she becomes emotionally prepared, not for perfection, but for presence. Presence is the foundation. A woman who is present can sense the shift in a conversation before it escalates. She can feel her own tension rising and choose to breathe instead of break. She can discern between a moment that needs confrontation and a moment that needs stillness. She becomes emotionally agile, flexible, resilient. And this flexibility makes her strong, not in the rigid way of resistance, but in the graceful way of water. Water does not resist, it flows. It adapts, it finds the path with the least harm. But it also shapes rock over time. A woman who responds with grace does the same. She influences the emotional tone of her environment not by force, but by consistency, by being herself fully and gently. Even in a world that often tries to provoke, the shift from reaction to response is also a reclaiming of time. Reactions steal time. Arguments extend for hours. Emotional spirals consume energy. But responses are intentional. They are like stepping stones across chaos. They move a woman forward, instead of keeping her trapped in cycles of emotional exhaustion. In relationships, this becomes a lifeline. So many partnerships crumble not because love disappears, but because reactions build walls of misunderstanding. Every sarcastic comment, every cold silence, every defensive tone adds another brick. But when one person chooses to respond differently, the wall begins to come down. It may take time, it may take courage, but the shift is inevitable. This choice is also a form of self-love. When a woman responds with care, she tells herself, I am worth protecting. My peace matters. My energy is valuable. She stops bleeding energy into situations that don't deserve it. She chooses growth over ego, healing over harm, and in doing so, she reclaims a part of herself that perhaps she lost along the way. And perhaps the most beautiful part of all is this: when a woman truly embodies this principle, she teaches without speaking. Her children learn, her friends notice, her partner evolves, not because she preaches, but because she is. Her being becomes the lesson. So when someone speaks to her with sharpness, she does not mirror it. When someone tries to pull her into chaos, she does not accept the invitation. When life throws storms her way, she anchors into the moment. She breathes, she reflects, she chooses, not from fear, but from freedom. And in that freedom, she finds not only her power, but her peace. A woman who has walked through life with her eyes open understands that emotional discipline is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is the quiet thread that holds her relationships together, the unseen force that allows her to navigate conflict without crumbling, and the internal compass that guides her through the fog of emotion into the clarity of intention. Emotional discipline is not about denying feelings. It's not about pretending to be unaffected. Rather, it is about building the strength to feel deeply while remaining grounded, to allow every emotion to arise without letting any single one define her behavior. In every meaningful relationship, emotions run deep. Whether it's love, disappointment, jealousy, anger, or longing, each emotion is a visitor. But the woman who has cultivated discipline in her inner world does not treat every visitor like a master. She welcomes the emotion, acknowledges it, learns from it, but does not let it dictate the course of her day or the tone of her conversations. This is a level of maturity that cannot be faked. It is built slowly, like muscle. Repetition, awareness, correction, again and again. There's a common misconception that discipline is rigid, but emotional discipline, in its true form, is soft. It is fluid. It is not control out of fear. It is care out of clarity. It allows a woman to feel sadness without becoming bitterness, to feel anger without becoming destruction, to feel fear without surrendering to it. And this is especially critical in the domain of relationships, where emotional chaos can easily lead to misunderstanding, resentment, or collapse. Consider the story of Neha, a woman in her early 40s who had spent the better part of her life giving into emotional impulses. She was generous, deeply loving, but also unpredictable. If her partner came home and didn't immediately ask how her day was, she would feel invisible. If he didn't react the way she expected during a vulnerable moment, she would spiral into withdrawal or lash out. Her emotions owned her, and her relationships, no matter how promising, always ended with the same painful outcome: emotional exhaustion and distance. At one point, after a painful breakup, Neha sat in her room reflecting not on what her partner had done wrong, but on what her patterns had cost her. It wasn't self-blame, it was self-responsibility. She realized something most never dove. Her emotions had never been the problem. Her lack of structure around them was. She had been a storm, hoping someone else would become her anchor. But what if she could become the anchor herself? That moment marked a shift. Neha began to build rituals of reflection. She began journaling, not just to vent, but to observe. She started every morning with a short meditation, just 5 minutes of sitting with her breath, watching what emotions came up. And in those small practices, she began to change. Her triggers didn't disappear, but her reactions to them softened. Instead of immediately sending a long emotional text, when she felt neglected, she would wait. She would sit with the feeling, ask herself, what am I really needing right now? Is this my wounded inner child speaking, or my centered self? The answers began to come, not through force, but through quiet. Emotional discipline is the bridge between emotional awareness and emotional maturity. Many people know what they feel, but they do not know what to do with what they feel, so they suppress it or spill it. But suppression leads to numbness, and spilling leads to damage. The disciplined woman walks the middle path. She learns how to hold her emotions without letting them leak all over her relationships. In a romantic relationship, this changes everything. For example, when a man becomes distant, the reactive woman jumps to conclusions. He must be losing interest. He must be hiding something. I must not be enough. But the disciplined woman pauses. She does not immediately interpret silence as rejection. She doesn't let anxiety drive her behavior. She reflects. Is this about him? Or is this about my fear of abandonment? She communicates when she's ready, not to accuse, but to connect. This kind of presence transforms a relationship. The partner no longer feels like he's being managed by her emotional weather. He feels space to be authentic, not performative. And the woman feels empowered, not desperate. She no longer needs to control the relationship because she trusts her ability to navigate whatever arises within it. But discipline also means restraint when the ego wants to dominate, when the temptation arises to say something just to wound, when we want to use our pain as power. The woman who has practiced emotional discipline does not weaponize her vulnerability. She doesn't use silent treatment to punish. She doesn't throw past mistakes into present arguments. She may feel the urge, but she chooses not to act on it because she knows the damage done in 5 seconds of recklessness can take weeks to repair. This is not easy. It requires emotional sobriety. To be sober in your emotions means not letting temporary states intoxicate your judgment. It means remembering your values when you're angry, remembering your compassion when you're hurt, remembering your commitment to truth when your ego is screaming for revenge. There's a quote, "Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most." In love, this is everything. What you want now might be to win the argument, but what you want most is intimacy. What you want now might be to be right, but what you want most is to be close. The disciplined woman never loses sight of the deeper desire. She's not easily seduced by emotional impulses because she is anchored in something larger than the moment. She is anchored in truth. To build this level of discipline requires tools. Emotional regulation is not a mystery. It is a learnable skill. One such tool is the practice of naming your emotion aloud. Neuroscientists call this affect labeling, and studies show that simply naming what you're feeling can reduce the emotional charge. For instance, saying to yourself, "I feel rejected right now," or "I feel afraid of being misunderstood," can immediately create space between you and the emotion. It moves the experience from the emotional centers of the brain into the cognitive centers, where reflection becomes possible. Another tool is the practice of deliberate pause. Whenever an emotional wave rises, count to 10. Not as a gimmick, but as a way to ground. Feel your feet. Breathe into your belly. Ask yourself, what will serve love here? Not your pride, not your fear, but love. The deeper intelligence that lives beneath emotion. In long-term partnerships, this discipline becomes even more vital. Over time, patterns develop. Old wounds reappear. Habits solidify. And without discipline, couples begin to react to each other not from the present, but from years of accumulated emotion. A simple request becomes a trigger. A misworded sentence becomes a war. But the woman who chooses to stay awake within the relationship can interrupt the cycle. She brings freshness into tired conversations. She brings curiosity into old complaints. She brings warmth into cold silences, not because she never feels the weight of history, but because she refuses to let the past dictate the future. One couple Anya Emran had been married for 10 years. They had reached a point where conversations felt repetitive. Anya often felt unseen. Imran felt unappreciated. Arguments erupted over trivial things, dishes left on the table, a forgotten phone call, a sigh taken the wrong way. One evening, during yet another escalating disagreement, Anya stopped. In the middle of her sentence, she looked at him and said, "I don't want to keep doing this. I love you too much to keep choosing the same pain. Let's pause." That moment cracked something open. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about breaking the pattern. That pause was her discipline in action. The courage to step out of the emotional loop and into presence. They began to rebuild, not because they had no pain, but because they chose not to let pain lead. Emotional discipline is not just about calming storms. It's also about holding joy. The undisciplined mind often sabotages happiness. It mistrusts peace. It looks for what could go wrong. The disciplined woman learns to savor, to receive love without suspicion, to rest without guilt. She doesn't let the past poison the present. She builds the muscle of receiving without fear. This, too, is emotional work, to allow yourself to be loved, to not turn tenderness into tension, to hold pleasure without waiting for punishment. The woman who has cultivated discipline becomes a container for love. She can hold the fullness of another without losing herself. And that makes her magnetic, not because of how she looks or what she says, but because of what she carries inside. She becomes trustworthy, not because she's perfect, but because she is consistent. The people around her know that she won't lash out unpredictably, won't collapse under pressure, won't disappear when things get hard. Her steadiness becomes a safe place. And in a world that often feels chaotic, that kind of woman becomes rare. Discipline also means discerning when to walk away. Emotional maturity does not mean tolerating everything. It means knowing when a connection no longer serves growth, when your boundaries are being consistently violated, when peace is being replaced by survival. The disciplined woman doesn't stay in relationships where she must betray herself daily to keep the other comfortable. She knows when to choose herself, not from anger, but from alignment. And even in endings, her discipline serves her. She doesn't rush into blame. She doesn't villainize the other to soothe her pride. She honors what was. She releases with grace. She lets go not because she doesn't care, but because she does. She chooses peace over prolonging what no longer fits. She chooses healing over history. All of this comes down to one truth. How you feel is valid, but how you act is your responsibility. The disciplined woman honors both. She sits with her emotions like honored guests. She listens, she learns. But when it's time to act, she leads from truth, not from turmoil. And in doing so, she becomes a source of strength not just for herself, but for every relationship she touches. The journey of becoming a truly smart woman is not defined by how much she knows, how flawlessly she speaks, or how much she accomplishes in the outer world, but by how deeply she masters herself. It is her ability to stay still in emotional storms, to hold her peace with unwavering grace, to guard her energy with discernment, and to set clear boundaries that protect rather than punish. Her intelligence is not in performance, but in presence. She chooses response over reaction, not because she's cold or detached, but because she understands the power of pausing before she speaks. Her silence isn't emptiness, it's wisdom in stillness. And her discipline isn't harshness, it is love directed inward, forming the structure through which deep, mature, and lasting relationships can grow. This woman doesn't need to be loud to be heard. She doesn't chase affection to feel worthy. She doesn't perform to be accepted. She walks through life anchored in who she is, aligned with what she values, and free from the chaos that once ruled her emotions. She becomes the mirror that reflects truth, the presence that brings peace, and the energy that draws respect. Not because she demands it, but because she embodies it. This is what it means to be a smart woman, to move with clarity, to love with wisdom, to live in truth, and to make every room she enters more honest, more peaceful, and more awake. Simply by being fully herself.